As Lincoln and Ronnie Ann engaged in their little gaming challenge, Maria silently watched the two from the hallway, already dressed in her nightwear. The nurse was quite happy to see the two get along well, especially since she remembered the two kids weren't exactly on good terms some months prior. However, despite how nice it was to have Lincoln around, she couldn't help but wonder one glaring question. Why hasn't he gone back home yet? Granted, he knew it was due to to some family issue, and she wasn't surprised about him bringing home some of his stuff over. But being that it was Monday, one would think whatever issues he had would have been resolved by now. Turning around, the Hispanic woman walked to the master bedroom, where her husband was lying on bed while staring at the TV. She closed the door, and what they were about to discuss wouldn't spill out into the hallway. Marcus? The man looked at her. Mm-hmm. Do you think something is very odd? Maybe what have happened to Lincoln when he first moved at our doorstep? Well, Marcus rubbed his nose. He clearly got some kind of a fight. Maybe it was probably one of his siblings or something, I mean. he gave a chuckle. Myself and me Mermos would go at it occasionally to the point where we couldn't stay in the same house for a while. He turned to her. But at the end, we only stayed in our friend's house for like 2 days. Maria folded her arms. That's my point. Lincoln's been here since Thursday and it's Monday now, and I'm not sure how long he plans on staying here. She walked over and lied down to the other side of the bed. I thought it might be just a weekend deal, and he would have been gone home by Sunday, but the fact that he's still here is telling me whatever happened to him on that night hasn't told us the full story. Marcus scratched his stomach. Well, you checked on him when you first got here. Did you figure out who he butted heads with? The woman nodded. He had bite marks on his hand. A teeth pattern suggested that they were from another human. So, is he going to turn into a zombie? The man joked. Maria then looked at her husband, annoyance, as he lightly slapped him the side of his head. No, Mia. It's one of his siblings likely bit him there. How many did Roberto say Lincoln had? 10. That took the man by surprise. Well, I guess someone has been busy in the baby factory. Either way, I think it's best if we call his parents and ask them. Maria shifted on a little on the bed. I'm actually surprised they haven't called us or anything. Marcus gave a shrug. Well, if they haven't called, then they obviously knows he's over there. I don't think they mind him staying an extra day, but you're right. We ought to call them. Or we could have a chat with Lincoln. He turned off his bedside lamp. Tomorrow's that is it. I gotta be up early. Maria looked at him for a moment before setting her sights on the TV. Nothing interesting was on. Some rerun of Senfield. Both parents didn't really have anything else they wanted or needed to do for the evening, so they were content on just laying there until they fell asleep. Back in the living room, some things were getting heated up in Ronnie Ann and Lincoln's game challenge. The boy thought he might have whooped by her character by now, but the little Latina had some tricks up her sleeve, and they were proving to be a strong resistance. Their thumbs had moved into a frenzy on the control pads as they kept their eyes glued intentionally on the screen. Lincoln bit his tongue in excitement, while Ronalda bit her lower lip. Over the course of one match, Lincoln won the first round easily, but Ronnie Ann won the second. Both were now in the third round. Their characters had a silver of health left, enough to be finished in one more move. Hope you're ready to be cooking by tomorrow. Lincoln said, giving a wide smirk. They're going down. In response, Ronalda shook her head, sliding her thumb across her neck. Oh well, we'll see who's going down, lame-o, she said in her mind. Lincoln made his first move, going for the heavy, mild downward thrust, but to his dismay, Ronalda pressed a couple buttons to the right moment and managed to block it. Not only that, but said block also put Lincoln's character in daze. The boy's eyes became wide as hubcaps before he frowned worryingly and frantically pressed the buttons to try and break out of the stun. Ronalda gave a wide smile as she pressed a series of buttons on a combo. Time seemed to slow down for Lincoln as he watched in utter horror as his character was utterly obliterated by the special move Ronalda's character unleashed. No! Lincoln shouted in sadness. Player 2 wins, flashed on screen. Ronalda cheered and started doing a small victory dance Oh yeah? Who's bad? Uh-huh, uh-huh, uh-huh. Lincoln slumped on the floor. How did I lose? He said in a defeated tone. Ronnie Ann gave a hearty laugh. Oh, come on! Stop being a baby, lame-o. You did well until I kicked your ass. She then laughed a little more, making the boy grumble in irritation. I'm so not looking forward to being on that skateboard. The Hispanic girl wrapped his arm around her shoulder. Trust me, it's not that bad. You'll get the hang of it. After falling on your face a couple times, she slapped him on the back a couple times. Lincoln formed a frown as he looked at his friend. You mean you nearly hit the pavement on Saturday? The tomboy gave a shrug. It's still a work in progress, but I'll make a pro skateboarder out of you. She smiled. It could also be mean bonding experience for you both. Roberto quipped in suggestively as he walked in the kitchen for a bottle of water. Both kids' cheeks reddened by the way he phrased it. As much as the occurrence, he hadn't come into their minds until now. Ronalda covered her face and hid her growing bush. Dang it, Bobby. As the evening dragged on, well, into the night, that is, not a soul was awake around midnight, as the Sandman moseyed around everyone to put their path to slumber. Inside the loud house, all the lights were off, as the occupants have got caught up on their sleeping patterns. Snores can be heard from various rooms, or in this case, certain musician and comedian. Loud music and sleep puns. Inside Lola and Lana's room, the former wore her usual sleep mask to bed, much like Lenny does, snoring loud enough, at times to make Lana's pet slightly disturbed. As for the former, with Lincoln having to forgiven her for her actions, she seemed to be content tonight. Previously, she would fidget in her sleep, until she finally cried out Lincoln's name, tears appearing in her eyes, but tonight the muddy child just lay sprawled onto her bedspread, producing farts equally as loud as Lola's snoring. In the room next to theirs, a certain Emo and Jacques were also sleeping. Well, at least one was. Lucy had her arms folded on her frame. Her hands were gripping the shoulders as if they were sleeping in her coffin. The 8-year-old gave a soft snore every now and then. Her bats were absent as she let them out to do their nightly feeding insects. Across from her, Lynn laid awake, as she had no previous nights. It seemed that Sandman didn't blast her enough. Unlike the last few times, the tomboy wasn't awake due to not wanting to suffer another nightmare. Instead, she was debating on getting herself and Lucy talked about hours ago, about how she felt about Lincoln's return action to their meeting. If Lincoln truly felt we were beyond forgiveness, he wouldn't have given us the chance to make it up to him. Lynn looked at Lucy. As that same phrase played in her loop, she couldn't help but feel a tinge of jealousy flash in her mind. Lucy was actually depressed all the time, so stuff like this wouldn't keep her up at night when she wanted to sleep. Pretty ironic for someone who loves the fact of being a vampire. She didn't stay up past 10 p.m. Given a small sigh, Lynn shifted a bit under the sheets to get more comfortable. After being careful not to agitate her foot wound, in the past she bounced off a tennis ball against the wall until she finally was asleep. But since she effectively refused to even touch her own sporting equipment, and that solution was out of the window. Instead, Lynn decided to stare blankly at the wall until her mind finally got bored enough to stop thinking and shut down. As if some unspoken prayer came to her, the Jacques felt her eyelids become heavy before they even shut themselves entirely. She was out like a light in seconds. What seemed like hours later, Lynn had awoken and needed to use the bathroom. Grabbing her crutches, she crept through the alleyway as quiet as possible so she wouldn't disturb anyone. It felt a little strange how eerie quiet it was at this time of the night. After doing their business, she exited and made her way back to her room. However, just as she passed the stairs, the sound of feet shuffling got her attention. As far as she knew, anyone was still sleeping. Even all the doors were still closed. It could have been one of the parents getting a late night snack, or Lynn's heart sank as the more dreadful thought came to bear. Someone might have broken into their house. Dad had always told the kids he wanted them to learn to lock the doors at night. The front door might have been locked, but the kitchen door probably wasn't. Given that she was possibly the only one awake, it was up to her to defend the house. The Jacques looked at her crutches for a brief second, figuring she could use them as weapons. Putting them with one hand, Lynn quietly made her way down the stairs. wincing every time she stepped on the spot that caused them to creak. Each time this happened, each breath hitched, as she thought an intruder might have noticed her presence. Thankfully, no one came out to greet her. As Lynn got a clear view of the building, she could see a window rummaging through some books near the fireplace. The person looked kind of small, around her height. She expected someone taller, but it didn't matter at this point. Whoever this person was, they were going to regret breaking into the castle loud. The 13-year-old crept behind the person until she was within striking distance. "All right, buddy, hands up where I can see them," the jock shouted, holding her crutches like a bat. The person didn't comply. In fact, they did was laugh. "Is that any way to treat your brother? Then again, I wouldn't expect anything else from you, Lynn." Lynn's heart sank to her stomach. The look of bewilderment etched on her face as she dropped her improvised weapon. "Lincoln?" Turning around, the person stepped into the light, illuminated from the window. Indeed, it was Lincoln. He had a photo album in his hands and was looking through it. Lynn shook her head, and shock began to wear off. "Lincoln, what are you doing here? I thought you weren't going to come back until we earned your forgiveness." Lincoln sat on the couch, continuing to look through the family photos. "Well, I did imply that, but actually, I had forgave everyone, including Mom and Dad, and trust me, being around them is just as awkward as you think." Lynn stood there for a moment, rather hesitant to get near the boy. She didn't want him attacking her, given how close he had been coming to do so earlier that day. However, it seemed that Lincoln was just preoccupied to do anything much else. After another moment, the athlete gingerly walked up to him, leaning down and see what he was looking at. The album he chose was consisted of pictures containing both himself and Lynn, from their infancy to their current ages. Lynn even smiled a few times as his eyes scanned over the photos. Fond of the memories came to his brain. To Lynn's thought, things just weren't adding up. Lincoln hadn't been in the house in 4 days, and he outright refused to be anywhere near the damn place until the whole family had earned his forgiveness. In fact, just yesterday he only forgiven the twins. Lynn rubbed her arm nervously. "Lincoln?" "Mm-hmm," the boy replied in a disinterested tone. "You said you forgave everyone, yet you weren't here just hours ago. I don't understand." "Well," Lincoln slammed the book shut, "technically I haven't forgiven anyone. There's one person who hasn't earned my forgiveness. Can you guess who that is?" He looked at Lynn with an indifference. A knot formed in the teen's stomach. "Me?" Lincoln nodded. "I may not be living here until I've forgiven everyone, but that doesn't mean I won't visit from time to time." He then tossed the book into the coffee table. "I was looking through the photo album to see if I could try to convince myself to love you again, like I said with everyone else, but clearly that didn't work." He then stood up. "What do you mean?" "All those fond memories we used to have as little kids, all the fun times we had together, even long before this crap started." The white-haired child looked at Lynn with a harsh glare. "I am constantly reminded of how little all this was meant to you. At the moment you thought I was an obstacle in your winning streak," he quoted with his fingers. Lynn visibly shrunk under that accusation. "Lincoln, look, I'm sorry about all that stuff, okay? I was just upset at the loss. I lashed out at someone, and I shouldn't have." "Yeah, you shouldn't have. But I want the chance to make it up to you, Lincoln. I just don't know how." Lynn then stared at the floor. Lincoln gave a heavy sigh, his gaze softening. "That's the thing, Lynn. You can't." The jock's eyes widened. But, she stammered. "Lynn, no matter what you'd say or do, it won't be enough to make me forgive you." Lincoln stared at the window, clasping his hands behind his back. "I used to think that you were the best sister I could have ever have. You were pretty close even. I used to enjoy all the times when we even roughhoused together. At least when I actually felt like it." He looked back at her. "But all that changed that moment when you decided to follow your dumb superstitions was more important than treating your fellow family member with respect. I may have did my part on spreading that fib, but it was you who refused to believe in me when I actually told the truth, and our family was quick to take your side. Anytime I see you is a constant reminder of that mistake, but at least until they learned their lesson." Lincoln turned to the door. "With you, at this point I can't believe you're even my sister. That's why I can't live here anymore. The boy walked over to the front door. Lynn was at the verge of tearing at this point. No, Lincoln, please, just give me another chance. Her voice was broken, was evident enough. Lincoln turned to her with an annoyed look. Goodbye, Lynn. No, Lincoln, wait! The door slammed shut. Lynn rushed over to the entrance, swung the door open, and she looked to and fro, but her brother disappeared. Don't go! The athlete slumped to the ground, crying her eyes out. She wanted to make things right, but now she knows that, with her being around the house, there was no way Lincoln could ever return. The teen hugged her knees as she continued to cry, only to be interrupted with a loud ringing reach her ears. Lynn's eyes flew open to find herself lying on the bed, on the clock on the nightstand beeping. She could also hear several alarms going out throughout the house. The brunette blinked a few times. Her eyes were still watery. Touching her face, she saw her fingers were covered in tear stains. It was a dream? The Jacques' mind finally began to register that, but it felt so real to her. A few more tears had streamed down her cheeks as she continued to lie in there in sadness. On the other side of the room, Lucy finally grew tired of the constant noise, threw her pillow at the clock, knocking it off the nightstand onto the floor. Thankfully, it increased its dreaded clamor. Rubbing her half-tired eyes, the 8-year-old heard light sobs coming from her roommate. Glancing at her older sister, she called out, Lynn, are you okay? No, was the meek reply she got. Lucy sighed awkwardly. Oh boy. Tuesday went on like a typical midday of the week. Kids went through their motions similar to Monday, from Lincoln and Clyde still adjusting to their newly developed popularity, with Ronnie Ann beginning to face scrutiny from the other girls as rumors began to spread about herself and Lincoln dating. To the teens and adults that carried on their day as usual, there was one subtle difference today. Chandler was finally cleared to attend school again after having his mouth wired shut due to his injuries. Naturally, anyone who came across gave them the cold stone glares or laughed at his injuries, knowing full well he deserved them. The redhead and Lincoln didn't interact all day, only passing glares from each other afar. Chandler absolutely hated how his popularity went down the drain after letting himself getting beaten by a nerd. Maybe he shouldn't have flung his little girl like a rag doll. Then again, she started it with her mud flinging, and while he was angry at the turn of the events, he believed that he would have been the one with the last laugh. With what he was cooking up, he had a Lincoln, and all he needed to do was to play with people's minds. Something wasn't hard to do, dealing with kids, but for now, he just take the insult stride, knowing that his revenge will sooner be later. But with the now new former popular kid forgot, he had to contend with the bullies. To enforce this, Chandler opened his locker just after lunch. He screamed in terror as a pile of garbage spilled onto him. Nearby, Ronnie Ann was smirking at her handiwork. With Connor, he carried out his day like normal. At times he saw Chandler or even Lincoln, but he kept a low key on all of them. They probably weren't aware that they went to the same school as they did. It wouldn't be hard to guess since the blonde was at their age at Royal Woods, didn't exactly have a lot of schools spread out. Between Chandler's petty revenge scheme and Lincoln's ever-increasing popularity, the boy knew that he'd be playing with fire if he got involved, and it would be worse if he was caught in the middle. His parents always said fire was a destructive tool. Not that it didn't stop Connor from setting a few paper towels on fire with the stove every now and then, just to see how it affects. It was also a chance Chandler might have a strong arm, Connor helping him sense the verbal agreement. But that didn't stop him. Connor just couldn't find a work around his ploy, and he still want that $350 the redhead had promised him. Maybe he could trick the jerk into paying up front, then set Chandler up to fail. The blonde laughed to himself and just thinking about it. As for Lucy, she couldn't help but feel like her talk with Lynn led to nowhere. The 13-year-old wouldn't talk to her all morning. She just remembered as mopey as ever. Only silver lining was that the Jacques actually ate something today. It was clear that Lynn probably had yet another nightmare, but it didn't appear as bad as the one she had, given that she didn't scream herself awake throughout the day. The 8-year-old couldn't take her mind off her sister, to the moment that she had unconsciously wrote out rhymes and verses on the poem about it. It was something that could not only convince Lincoln of how sorry she felt, But of course she had something she can give Lincoln. She hadn't done much about it before, just poems was her best trait. She just needed to write something. Now, how to get to the point how miserable Lynn had felt since his departure. The young girl's heart ached whenever she recalled how Lincoln grilled her in the library for how much he sacrificed for her sake. And right now, Lucy hoped that to God that she wouldn't get on writer's block. That was always an issue with her whenever she wrote. With teens, Lenny was looking forward to the trip to the mattress store with Rita after school. Luna also seemed rather excited for some reason. Apparently she and Luann were about to finish their little project and was sure it would rock Lincoln's socks off with every word. While the two didn't interact much, Bobby told Lori about Ronnie Ann planning to teach Lincoln how to ride a skateboard. Lori attempted to ask how that would be a potential date, but decided not to do it with that since it looked like a casual hangout than anything else. So the day carried on without much incident. However, no one would be prepared for the sudden shift that was to come. Around the mid-evening hours, the Santiago and Lincoln were having dinner again. This time it was Mexican macaroni salad. While everyone else was silently eating, Marcus and Maria were giving visual cues to one another, and so in the debate on who was to ask the important question. But at the end, they decided to ease into it. "So, kids, how was everyone's day?" Maria asked. Ronaldo shrugged. "As usual. Some girls kept looking at me funny because I was hanging out with Lincoln." "Why is that?" the mother asked again. "Because they're jealous that I'm friends with him." "Ooh, so someone's been in a Casavona, I see." Marcus chuckled as he gently elbowed Lincoln, making the boy's face turn into a light shade of red. "I wouldn't say that," the boy said sheepishly. "Well, apparently I did get in that scuffle on Sunday, so I wouldn't be too surprised. You should see what happens in high school when two guys started fighting. Practically half the school looks at it. Personally, I don't see that kind of stuff getting into, especially when it's happening in this small hall in my locker on," Bobby stated. "Like last week?" the father asked. "Yeah, there was a bit of a dent on the locker next to mine." "So, Lincoln," Maria stated, "have any things been resolved at home?" All three kids nearly spat out their food upon hearing that. Lincoln's breath hitched when he finally registered the question, causing the food to go down the wrong pipe. The boy coughed relentlessly to clear his windpipe. Bobby placed Num on the back to aid him. After a few seconds, Lincoln finally spat out a piece of macaroni. "I'm gonna guess that means no," Marcus stated. "Well, I mean," Lincoln cleared his throat. "It's getting better, it's still not doing well." His uneasy tone didn't help. "Lincoln," Maria started putting down her fork. "When you came here on Thursday, it was clear you were in a fight. The marks on your hands indicated those bites were from another person. Now, I haven't every reason to believe you were end up getting in a fight with one of your siblings. The fact that you were quick not wanting to speak with your family tells us it might have been something very serious. We're just concerned about whatever it is that happened to your home will get resolved soon. I mean, we thought you may have been staying there for just a weekend, but the fact is starting to drag into another week." Marcus paused. "It's nothing against you, Neo, but we know you'll have to go back to your own house." Lincoln shifted uncomfortably in his seat. It was true he hadn't told the Santiago parents everything. He only spared the details weren't well, and he needed some time away. The ashen-haired child felt like he couldn't tell them everything because he didn't know them as well as he knew Ronnie Ann and Bobby. So the trust factor was a major issue. He still couldn't bear seeing his own family broken apart, despite saying he'd do so anyway. If they failed to regain his trust, however, since Ronaldo brought him to their home, both parents have shown them nothing but kindness and treated him as if they were their own king. They were just acting any concerned and sensible parent. "You're right. I do have to go back to my house at some point," Lincoln started, staring at his plate. "It's just right now, I really can't. Not after what happened last week and a while before that." Both parents glared at each other in confusion. "What happened last week?" Marcus asked. Lincoln twiddled his fingers. "You may want to continue eating. It's a very long story," Lincoln said. As the family continued with dinner, Lincoln told the parents everything that happened so far. The Santiago children heard this story before, so they didn't need a refreshing. Instead, they needed to watch how their mother and father would react. The moment Lincoln told him that his family locked out on the premises, that he was bad luck. Maria was aghast and appalled by such actions, while Marcus looked as if Lincoln sprouted a second head while he had his fork in his mouth. It went on with saying that both parents looked as if they were close to flipping the table when Lincoln told his family the real truth, but they refused to believe him. The boy noted this and told him that it was his fault for lying in the first place, but it did very little to ease the sentiments. So he then went on about how he managed to get his family to believe he wasn't bad luck anymore via squirrel suit, and ended up causing more harm than good. Lincoln also made him know how he regretfully found out that his furniture had been trashed due to them believing it was quote-unquote tainted. Both parents looked like they wanted to say something, but held their tongue as Lincoln wasn't finished. He recalled the whole squirrel boy issues with the stuff that happened to him while wearing the suit, and now his family didn't seem to care much about how he felt. The boy held an indifferent tone, as how he eventually grew sick of the treatment, verbally tore his family into a new one after the family finally got rid of the suit. However, Lincoln couldn't help but form a little small glare as he recounted on how he got in a fight with his sister Lynn, which explains the injuries on that night. Seemed to quell the anger on both parents, if only by a bit. The rest was history. So the next day, Lincoln continued twiddling the spoon. I met Lucy at the school library, and she asked me to come home. I refused to do so until all of them convinced me that they wouldn't let something like this happen again, even pointing out still how I was close to calling the cops. The boy paused for a bit to eat a little. I still have that option if they try to bring me back before I can trust them again, but I still don't like it. As a message from Lucy, I told her I had a place to stay so they don't try looking for me, but I never told them where I really was. Lincoln, if you went through all that, then why didn't you tell us? Maria asked. Lincoln bit his lower lip as he stared at the two adults. I'm sorry, I didn't. It's just that I felt that I couldn't trust you guys before. I didn't know how much both of you as much as I knew Ronnie Ann and Bobby. I was worried you guys might end up calling the police on my family. He rubbed his arm. I had to look up what kind of charges they would face, since I'm not familiar with the legal system. None of them were good. He gave a slight sigh as he rested his head on the table. As much as I don't like my family right now, I don't like the idea of my parents going to jail for 10 years. Plus, my sisters might get sent to juvie or put into foster care. I've already forgiven my twins as a start. Well, Lincoln, Marcus spoke. Something does say that something deserves attention of the authorities. But let me tell you this. The fact you were about to call the police but it doesn't seem really matter, we will. Now, I'm not sure what kind of people your family is to make they think it's perfectly okay not to house a kid over some mere excuse such as bad luck. But you certainly fought this through. It really says how smart you were as a kid. Lincoln rubbed the back of his head. Thanks, I guess. Now, you said your family doesn't know about your whereabouts, right? Maria asked, to which Lincoln nodded. Well, actually, since we're on that subject, they do. Roberto popped up. Lincoln looked at Bobby in shock. What? Roberto raised his hands over defense. Now, bro, before you jump into conclusions, I didn't tell them anything. Lori came to me and asked why I'd been acting so distant to her, and told me that the girls found out from looking up the cameras or something. Lincoln's eyes then shifted as how he felt that his sisters would have found out his whereabouts, before he suddenly smacked his forehead. Lisa's cameras. I forgot about those. If it makes you feel better, Lori said that even though they know where you are, they won't try to force you to come back. They don't want to risk driving you further away from them. Lincoln stayed silent for a bit. There was no telling how long his sisters were trying to know where he was staying with the Santiagos, but since they didn't drop by or say anything, it seemed like they were doing well to make sure they stay on his good side. Still, she didn't help but feel how uncertain how he felt. Secret was out. Well, since they already know you're here, mind if I call them? Marcus asked. So what's the house number? Sure, Lincoln replied, not sure of what to do. He gave to Santiago Parach his number. Maria grew weary. Marcus, what are you going to say? Nothing. I'm just going to talk with them, the father said as he grabbed the house phone. Oh boy, here we go, Renalda muttered. What? The chip-toothed male asked. You'll see, the Hispanic girl replied, as she started rolling a couple of napkins to stuff her ears. The preteen handed a couple to Lincoln so he could do the same. At the Loud House, Lynn Sr. was preparing a turkey loaf in the kitchen when the phone rang. Hello? Hi, am I speaking to Lynn Sr.? A Hispanic voice spoke. This is he. Hello, sir. This is Marcus Santiago. Mr. Santiago! What do I owe the pleasure of this call? The father then smiled. Just a few things concerning your son, Marcus stated, his tone becoming sharp. Lynn's face paled. Did something happen? No, he's fine. But I just found out the real reason why he had to spend 4 days here. And don't be surprised on how if you found out your family knew he's over here. Is your wife here too? Lynn's heart sank. He checked outside and saw Van Zilla was still absent. No, she's with my daughter Lenny shopping for mattresses. Marcus chuckled on that. Marcus, don't say anything stupid. Maria's voice was then heard in the background. Well, here's a message to the both of you. What in the hell you were thinking when you were doing to your son? You have a nice boy here who spent a good amount of time hating his family because you idiots took a lie way too far. I mean, who in the fuck kicks their kid out over bad luck? Have you heard any parent doing that before? Lynn, of course, held the phone away from his ear due to all the screaming. He didn't know whether or not it was a rhetorical question or not, but he was about to respond. However, Marcus continued, Of course not, because you're the only family that's done it. Oh, and I just loved how your son told me about the putas got rid of his bed and dresser because you thought it was tainted. All this just because he wanted some alone time, but yet you morons decided to be a curse? No, a threat to your overall health. Myself and my wife are very concerned about what kind of issues this boy has been facing. But now we see why he refused to come back home. You're very lucky he hasn't called the cops on you, stupid freaking asses, because I wholeheartedly would have. Now, when your own son comes home, you better give him an outstanding freaking apology and treat him like he's the best godforsaken blessing you've ever had. I used to think your family was decent, one despite the size, but I guess I was wrong. Marcus stopped, as he'd been advertently cursing out the other man on the native tongue. Now, if I hear about you treating your son like that again, the police are going to have arrested me as well, because I will come down there and give you a beating so hard that you'll be in your nightmares. Do I make myself clear? The Hispanic man finished with a threatening tone. Yes, sir. Lynn fearfully satisfied. Marcus hung up the phone. Lori and Luann were in the living room when their father answered the phone. Their curiosity piqued as their dad seemed distressed, followed by a sound of clear shouting on the line. Dad? Who was that? Lori asked. Let's just say it's Mr. and Mrs. Santiago. They weren't too happy about finding out what Lincoln's been through. The girl's eyes went wide. So does that mean... Lynn Sr. sighed as he put the phone back on the receiver. Yes, Luann, Lincoln is aware of where he is. Honestly, girls, we should have expected something like this, but still. The father then reassigned to go back to cooking dinner. Lori and Luann looked at each other before deciding to head upstairs. Well, I think I made my point, Marcus said in content, after putting the phone back. Probably a bit too much, Marcus, Maria exasperated, having a hand over her eyes in annoyance. If I didn't say it now, it would have bugged in me all night, the father explained. What just happened? Lincoln asked as he unplugged his ears. Trust me, little bro, you don't want to know, Bobby stated. Ronaldo sighed, taking the makeshift earplugs out. Daddy does whatever he's really upset. Last time it was one of his co-workers because he kept pushing stuff in late or something. She made a casual hand wave. Marcus snorted, picking up his now empty plate. He deserved it though. Because of him, my boss was on the case about it. Plus, sorry Lincoln, but your father needs to hear that. It's fine. I mean, I did the same thing when I finally snapped. Lincoln then looked at his plate, which was still half empty. If it's alright, I think I'm done eating. It's fine now, dear. Now all you guys get yourself ready for bed, Maria ordered. Alright. Ronaldo then complied, jumping out of her seat as she grabbed the plate off the table. But I'm not finished with this. Maria shrugged before gathering the rest of the dishes to wash them. Marcus then went to the bedroom to take a shower, while Bobby retired to his room. Lincoln grabbed his camper bag to fish out his PJs. Ronnie Ann then poked her head out of the hallway. Hey Lincoln, have you ever watched some of these funny police chase videos? Lincoln shook his head. Not that I know of. Why? Finish changing so I can show you. You're going to have a good laugh. The little Athena chuckled before heading to her room.